Okay, and welcome to our Facebook Live friends too, and of course all our friends on Zoom. Welcome everyone, and those people who are watching on YouTube as well. I would ask you, if possible, to grab a Megillat Esther, a book of Esther. You don't need to, but I think you get so much more out of what we're going to talk about this evening, which is the amazing secrets. I mean, you thought the crown was full of royal intrigue. It's got nothing on the story of Megillat Esther, the book of Esther, the story of Esther and Mordechai, our hero and heroine, and of course the evil Haman, Boo, and of course Achashverosh. So that is what we're going to be doing, a 3-part series on. Do grab a Megillat Esther. You'll find them at the back of the Chumash if you want. And we have a lot to talk about this evening. It's an amazing story, and there's so much hidden away. And hidden is a great word to use to describe Megillat Esther, because we're going to see that the name Esther actually means hidden, and it wasn't really her real name. The heroine of our story adopted that name. Why? We're going to see later on. But Megillah means a scroll, but it also means legala, to reveal something. So this story that we're going to go through, this amazing story, which unusually we create an entire holiday around, which doesn't happen. There have been many miracles that have happened for the Jewish people over the thousands of years, and we don't always make a Jewish holiday around it. We sometimes do. But this story, my friends, is so important. There's so many themes and ideas that are invested in this story that it can change the way that you will relate to Jewish history, to your family, to your religion, of course, to God. So where are we in history when this story begins? Well, there was a king of Babylon. Babylon in its day, modern day Iraq, was an extremely powerful state. And it was run by a guy called Nebuchadnezzar, a very famous historical character. And he takes the throne in the year 445 BCE. Now, as soon as they start to get power in the Middle East, it doesn't take long before they start to expand their power into what they're really interested in, which of course is the land of Israel. And the Jewish people are in Israel, and we've been there for hundreds of years because Solomon had built the temple 400 years before. And this temple had been a shining light, a beacon to the Jewish people throughout the land of Israel. Comes along Nebuchadnezzar, he overtakes Israel, takes possession of it, and in the Jewish year 425 BCE, the first temple is destroyed. Of course, the temple in Jerusalem represents so much as the heart and the soul of our people. But not only does it do that, but he exiles the Jewish people from their homeland. And this is the first of 4 exiles the Jewish people go through. And the Jewish people now spread out throughout the Middle East. And the main grouping of Jews ends up in a land called Persia, which many of you thought was actually in Great Neck, New York. And you'd be right today. But back then, it is in modern day Iran. And this story revolves around the capital city of Persia, which is called Shushan. And in Shushan, there was an extra capital area that was moated off with a moat around it and high walls. That is really where the power base was, and that's going to be called Shushan Habira. And that's where the Jewish people are. We now find ourselves, after being exiled from our land, our beautiful Solomon temple had been destroyed, find ourselves in Persia, in Shushan for the most part, or the Jewish people now scattered throughout the Middle East and further out. And the power base moves into, eventually, Shushan Habira. So Nebuchadnezzar takes control. The next dictator comes along, and his name is Belshazzar. He doesn't lead for too long. But our story is going to open up with a person who takes over from Belshazzar, and his name is Achashverosh. And he is the one, my friends, who moved the power base of the kingdom of Babylon, which was in Iraq, all the way into Persia, modern-day Iran, into a city which today is probably called Hamadan, which is pretty much where Mordechai and Esther are presently buried. And the opening scene of the Megillah, like any good story, opens up with a party. And not just any party, an extremely lavish party that lasts for 180 days. That's 6 months. Why is the Megillah opening up with a party? Who made this party and why? So the reason this party was made because of the leader of the non-free world was an individual called, or referred to, wasn't really his name, Achashverosh. What does the name Achashverosh mean? So one interpretation says Ach, which means brother, Rosh, which means head. He was the brother of another head, which means he was very much like someone else. Who's that? Nebuchadnezzar. They were like brothers in arms, although one took over from the other. Still, they were the same individuals and they wanted to bring the same harm and detriment to the Jewish people. And so that's Achashverosh. Another opinion is Achashverosh is Ach Barosh. Ach means Rosh in the head. He gave us a headache. He drove us crazy with all of his decrees. Now, Achashverosh was not of royal blood. Nebuchadnezzar was, but Achashverosh wasn't. He was a simple individual, actually a stable boy, who joined the military and made his way up and became a very powerful military leader. And when the scene opens at the beginning of Megillat Esther, which we're going to see is the 3rd year of his reign, he is a paranoid and vicious, narcissistic, megalomaniac dictator. But if you look at Megillah, he's not depicted that way. What we're going to do is you have to read between the lines. Why not? Why do Mordechai and Esther, who wrote Megillat Esther, the book of Esther, why it's named after her, we're going to see a little bit later. But why exactly is Achashverosh, who we just saw is an evil, paranoid dictator, why is he depicted like some jovial king, right? Like we see him with a crown on the side of his head. Hey, I'm Achashverosh, making silly decisions for his people. And the answer is because at the end of the story, Achashverosh doesn't die and he remains king. And therefore, he was presented to some degree with this Megillah, with Megillat Esther. And he's going to be reading through this Megillah. And he's going to be reading the story, so he couldn't be depicted as such an evil, bad character. For sure, Haman could. And Haman was and is depicted terribly, but Achashverosh could not be depicted as a terrible individual. And so that's Achashverosh. And he's taken power. And he's usurped it because he's not of royal blood. And he's had to fight his way to the top. And he fought well and hard. And so what does he do? He throws a party. Why? And why does it last for 6 months? Why a 180-day party? And the answer is because dictators, when they first take power, they fight their way to that point, and then they want to ingratiate themselves with all the people. And that's exactly what he does. And he invites people from all the kingdoms that he rules over, of which there are 127 provinces. He controls pieces of land that stretch all the way Mihodu ad Kush, from India to Ethiopia. And so Achashverosh wants to invite the nobles and the leading politicians from all of those countries in order to come to his party because, hey, I'm your leader. And he does the same for the Jewish people who had been exiled years before from their homeland Israel. And the problem is that the Jewish people came and they enjoyed the party. Only one person didn't come. And his name is Mordechai. And we're going to see more about him later on and why he's the one who's going to stoke the coals and make everyone really angry with him. And so Achashverosh, like any good dictator, decided to throw this party and make it extremely lavish. But he decorated his vast palace with gold and silver and with couches and with tapestries, which we can see from the wording used was stolen from our holy temple in Jerusalem. And so the Jewish people celebrating this party of Achashverosh are now celebrating with the ruins, with the booty that had been taken from the temple. Not a very good sign, is it? that that's how far we had descended. Now, Achashverosh is like any dictator, is extremely insecure and terrified of people killing him, which we're going to see in a few moments. There was an assassination attempt against him, and of people taking his power. And that we're going to see is going to be a key turning point. But one thing every dictator wants is to be legitimate. What does Achashverosh do to make himself look legitimate? He does a few things. Number one, he marries a woman of royal blood, and her name is Vashti. And she is a granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar, that original Babylonian leader who destroyed the temple and exiled the Jews, from which Ahasuerus has now received all his great wealth from, that he's now making this big party and decorating his big fancy palace. So him and Vashti, they are married, but if you think about it, she's not so impressed with him because she comes from royal blood and he fought his way. He's just a military leader who made his way to the top. So while this party is happening, and by the way, we're told that there was food at the party, which was incredibly lavish, and there was wine at the party that was older than each person who drank from it. If you were 30, you drank 31-year-old wine. If you were 50, 51-year-old wine, it was amazing. And there were gold and silver cups that were flowing, and people would like almost make them disposable. And we even told the Megillah that the wine was kosher, as was the food. Because once again, Achashverosh wants everyone to feel part of him. You may know that we dress up on Purim. That's a great custom, which goes back a long, long way, thousands of years, for us to dress up on Purim. There's many reasons. One of the reasons why that is, there's a lot of clothing that's being mentioned in the Megillah. And this is one of the first occasions. Achashverosh went out of his way to dress up. It's hinted at in the Megillah, but it's mentioned explicitly in Jewish writings, as the high priest in Jerusalem. The high priest would wear 8 special big day kahuna. And Achashverosh dressed himself up in the 8 items of the high priest in Jerusalem. Why would he do that? What a terrible thing to do. Well, he's getting dressed up on Purim, so maybe that's one reason. But the real reason is because, what's he saying to the Jewish people? You know what? I know you think you're going to go back and rebuild your temple. It's not going to happen. Your days are over. There was a prophecy that the Jewish people would be in exile for 70 years, says the prophet Jeremiah. According to Ahasuerus, he was wrong. The 70 years have gone. They're all over. I am your new high priest. That's the first citing of clothing. Another reason that clothing is mentioned so many times in the Megillah and we get dressed up on Purim is because clothing hides who we are. It hides us. We hide underneath our clothing, right? God hides himself at various times in Jewish history. It seems like God isn't there, isn't interested in us, but that's not true. He's hiding. And actually, Megillat Esther, the book of Esther, is the only book in all of scriptures where God's name is not mentioned even once. It's as though God himself goes into hiding. And Moshe Rabbeinu Moses, at the end of his life, in the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, which is a 40-day speech that Moses gave to the Jewish people that became the book of Deuteronomy, Devarim, he says there's going to be a time when God is going to hide himself. Don't panic, he is there. But there are times when God reveals himself with open miracles, and you feel God in your life, but there are times when God hides himself. And this, he says, is one of those times. As it says, V'anochi hastir astir parnai, I am going to hide my face. That, say the rabbis, is a reference to this story. So there's no open miracles in this story. This entire story on Megillat Esther is going to seem like coincidence after coincidence after coincidence, but really our job is to peek behind the curtain and realize that it's just clothing covering the entire story, and really God is driving every single detail of the events. And so Ahasuerus, as any good host, decides to get completely drunk and wasted at his own party. And he gets so drunk that at the end of his party, he calls his wife Vashti to come out and to dance for him. And the Megillah tells us that he asked her to come out dressed in her royal crown. Now, on the surface, that may seem very, very nice. But why is he doing that? Say the rabbis, what Esther meant to say when she wrote the Megillah was that Vashti was told to come out in her crown and only her crown, with nothing else on. Here we see a lack of clothing being mentioned in Megillat Esther. And she refuses. She refuses. There's a number of reasons why, but on the surface, by doing so, she'll be demeaning herself to Achashverosh and all the people who will be watching at the party. Because she was having her own party with women only. That's not because she was a very modest woman. She was actually a terrible, terrible woman. The Gemara tells us that Vashti hated the Jews more than Haman. She used to take Jewish women. She used to strip them naked, would beat them and make them work on Shabbat. So please do not join the Vashti fan club, and certainly don't join the Achashverosh fan club. They're depicted in this way only because Achashverosh did love Vashti. And had he read in the Megillah about her murder and her death, the way he kills her, which he's going to do, he would have been extremely upset. And so Esther was very careful to remove any things that would upset Achashverosh, because once again, he's going to read this book after the story has completed. Vashti and Achashverosh now have an incredible power struggle. And this struggle is seen explicitly, but there's also something very fascinating of the way they refer to each other. Achashverosh, who remember, is not of royal lineage. He has no blue blood inside him. And Vashti does. So she's always looking down on him. Like, you're nothing compared to my grandfather Nebuchadnezzar. He was a real royal leader. Who are you? And he's like, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't be queen right now. I'm the one that chose you. And I'm the one that married you. And took you, actually kidnapped her when she was a young girl in order to marry her. And so he says, bring me Vashti, the queen. Vashti Hamalka. And she responds via her messengers, you tell that guy, Achashverosh, that Queen Vashti is not coming. Unusual. He refers to her as Vashti the queen. She refers to him, she refers to herself when she speaks to him as, I am Queen Vashti. What's the difference between Vashti the queen or Queen Vashti? What's the difference between Queen Elizabeth or Elizabeth the queen? And the rabbis tell us something fascinating. This was a political struggle that was happening inside the palace between two sides. The side of Achashverosh and his people and advisors, and Vashti, her people and her advisors. And he was saying, you bring me Vashti, the queen. She's Vashti. It happens to be she's my queen, but only because of me. And she says, you're nothing. I'm the royalty. I'm of royal blood. You tell him that Queen Vashti puts her title first. Queen Elizabeth is better than Elizabeth the Queen. You tell him that Queen Vashti, Hamalka Vashti, is not coming to see him. He's got a dilemma. What does he do? He goes to a group of advisors and says, I've got a problem. By the way, this is the only time in the entire Megillah that Achashverosh actually goes to advisors to ask them what to do. Later on, he's going to have so much power and he's going to be such a paranoid, megalomaniac, narcissistic leader that he doesn't even go to advisors. He has one person he consults with, and that's going to be Haman. And so he says, what shall I do? And there is an individual over there, and his name is Memuchan, and he says, if you let her get away with this, every woman is going to rebel against their husbands, and they're all going to overturn you and overtake your kingdom. What does any dictator do? He freaks out. And he decides that this person, who by the way we're told was actually Haman, his name over here is called Memuchan, which means ready, because before the story even begins, God is ready to take him down, right? The higher you go, the further the fall. And so, Achashverosh decides to kill her. It's not mentioned explicitly in the Megillah for one reason, because he did actually love her, and he would have been upset had he read it later on. What does he do? It's not so pretty. I know you don't hear this in Jewish day school. He hangs her, and then he has her head chopped off in a drunken state, And then they bring her head on a platter, a tray, to the party for everyone to look at. Now Ahasuerus has full power. But like any good dictator, the next morning he sobers up and he's very, very upset. And he's like, I love that woman. What am I going to do? And Haman jumps forward in his disguise as Mumuchan and says, it's okay. You're going to find yourself another wife because you could be a great king, but you need to find someone else who can fill her place. And so what does he do? He decides he's not going to make the same mistake he made last time. Because last time he took a royal woman of royal blood. Instead, he's going to make competitions of many, many women vie for the opportunity to become his wife. And many of these women volunteered themselves to have the possibility of being the next future wife of Ahasuerus, which wasn't really a bad role, unless you weren't chosen, and then it was terrible. But we're told that there was a young girl, a young Jewish girl, and her name was Hadassah. Hadassah was her real name. We're going to give her a code name. Actually, we don't. Mordechai, her cousin, who adopted her because she was an orphan, he's going to give her a code name. And the code name is Esther. And the word Esther in Hebrew means hidden. Why? Because remember, this is a story of things being hidden. God is hidden in the story. Esther is going to have to hide her identity and her background in order to hide herself in the palace in order for her plan, which is also a very hidden secret. And we're going to see the plan that her and Mordechai concocted was insane. A crazy political scheme that could have ended, and actually likelihood it was going to end with absolute complete death for both of them and maybe many more Jews. And yet their plan is going to be brilliant. Still, she's adopted and she's taken by Mordechai, who adopts her. They're cousins. According to one tradition, he actually married her as well. Right? They were of a very similar age. By the way, how old was Hadassah or Esther on the story? I mean, the entire story takes, 17, 20 years to happen. So many people think Esther is a young girl, right? That's how she's depicted in our minds. If there was an Esther movie, which I'm surprised there wasn't already, I'm sure it'll be someone like, I don't know, Scarlett Johansson, who happens to be Jewish, who would depict her. Actually, she wasn't in her teens or even her 20s. One opinion is she was in her 30s, and some say even her 40s or 60s. Look at the story a very different way. She's less Scarlett Johansson and probably more Meryl Streep, to be honest with you, who's not Jewish. But anyway, you get the idea. And so Esther is a name that's given to her because she cannot reveal her identity. And Esther also means something in Persian. Ishtar means the moon. Some say it means like Venus. It's a very beautiful name. And that's going to be important because she's going to have to rely upon many people from all over the world loving her and seeing her as their queen. So she isn't just the queen of the Jewish people, who weren't even aware that she was Jewish at this point, but she's going to have to be the queen of the world. And that's what Esther was. Esther was the queen of the entire world. Her great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, Sarah, was the queen of time. And these two characters, Sarah, the queen of time, and Esther, the queen of space, are going to make up female royalty for us, the Jewish people. And they are two of the greatest prophetesses in Jewish history. And so Esther, we're told, lived in Shushan, in the home of Mordechai. But now Ahasuerus is looking for a new wife. And what do? They go through the streets and they ask around and they ask to see children and they want to see your sister and let's see your cousins. And they find Esther. And she was an extremely beautiful woman, says the Megillah. V'tilakach Esther, says the Megillah. They kidnapped her. Other women volunteered themselves from all over the world, but not Esther. She didn't want the job. She didn't want to volunteer herself to be married to this maniac who just killed his wife, who wasn't even Jewish. And yet she was taken against her will. And she was taken to the palace. Now, the way it worked, the Megillah itself tells us in quite some detail, was that before you could even meet Ahasuerus, you had to spend 1 year preparing for the honor to meet this madman. Okay, so in case you're an Ahasuerus fan, I think I'm going to dispel any myths that you have about him. And so Esther, like everyone else, was taken in to a special home, given beautiful creams and perfumes, and she spent 1 year inside this place so Ahasuerus and his people could decide whether this woman was worthy enough to be a queen. By the way, I'll mention that she was careful to have 7 maids take care of her. That's what she was offered while she was in this home, inside this house of Haggai. Why exactly did she need 7 maids? And the reason is she had 1 for every day of the week. So that when the person, her maid, turned up on the 7th day, which was Shabbat, they would see her lying around, not doing any work. But they wouldn't see any difference from her during the week. So this way, there was no way of anyone knowing that she was actually Jewish. She was actually Jewish. Mordechai was terrified for Esther. And he was actually a very important official in the land of Persia, in Shushan. And he was one of the few people who had access to Shushan Habira, the capital. Right? Just like we have Congress, right? And it's all surrounded by police. He was allowed inside there because he was a great leader of the Jewish people. And so he was given access to the entrance, to the Shar, the gate of the Melech, of the king. So he's outside, she's inside for 1 year, and he's obviously terrified, but he wants to know what's happening because he realizes it must be a reason why she was taken. It couldn't be coincidence. So he wanted to make sure that he was aware of what was going on with her inside the palace. What happened to all these women? Well, when their time came, they were taken either voluntarily or against their will, and they were raped by Ahasuerus. He has to decide whether this is going to become his future queen, a despicable individual. What happened to them after that? If they were not chosen to be queen, it's okay, they weren't killed, but they still couldn't be set free. Because you can't have someone walking around the streets of Persia or Ethiopia or India, wherever they came from, and be like, yeah, 2 weeks ago, I was with Ahasuerus the king, and now I'm with this guy. It looks terrible. And so Ahasuerus set up a harem, where every single woman, after going through this ordeal, would spend the rest of their lives as being just beings, right, for Ahasuerus' pleasure for the rest of their lives. So this was another great fear that Esther had. Her time came, and once again, she didn't put on any makeup or perfumes that night because she didn't want to be chosen. But she realized if she was chosen, it wasn't the makeup that did it. It wasn't the perfume. It must have been God. And so she was taken and she was abused by Ahasuerus. Immediately, we're told, he falls in love with her, with this woman, this Esther. And he is obsessed with Esther. So much so that he doesn't even need to look at the rest of the women. He pushes them straight into the harem and says, this is going to be the woman who is going to be Tachat Vashti. Tachat Vashti means instead of Vashti, the wife he killed, but it also means underneath Vashti. Because Vashti, she gave me too much trouble. She kept pushing her royal credentials down my throat. I was sick of it. So you, Esther, you'll be my wife, but you'll be underneath. And he kept asking her, what is your background? But she would not tell him because Mordechai said, do not tell Ahasuerus what your background is, whatever you do. Our plan, they had already concocted this plan in the chance that she would be selected, needed her to keep her background, i.e. her Judaism, completely unknown, anonymous. This would allow her plan to come to fruition. One of the reasons is because there was a guy called Haman. And Ahasuerus had now taken Haman, who had given him a lot of advice how to really consolidate his power, and made him second to himself in Persia. Now, Haman was an extremely powerful individual. First of all, in terms of money, he was very, very wealthy. And he also now was second in command to Ahasuerus. This was bad news. It's about to get much worse. Because Haman made a decree. And the decree was, when I walk through the streets of Shushan, and I walk around Shushan Habira, everyone must bow down to me out of respect and deference. Now, the wording that's used to describe the bowing down is wording korim u'mishtachavim, which means you not only have to bow down, you have to prostrate yourself. Right? These are words we actually say in Aleinu. We, the Jewish people, we only bow down to God. We don't take a knee to any human. However, since he's a powerful individual, it was expected that you bow down and show respect for him. But there was one person who, if you remember, is hanging around outside the palace who would not bow down to Haman. And his name was Mordechai. Mordechai, let me give you a little bit of background to this individual. Mordechai came, we're told, was Ish Yemini. He came from the tribe of Benjamin. Now, the tribe of Benjamin had another very famous individual, very famous, who came from that tribe. And his name was Shaul, Saul, the first ever king of Israel. That was Mordechai's great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, going back a number of years. Now, Saul had made a mistake. The mistake he made was he was told to kill a king by the name of Agag. Agag was an evil terrorist of a king, and he was the king of a nation called Amalek. Amalek had been a thorn in the side of the Jewish people from the moment we left Egypt, when they came to attack us, right through to the present day. So Shaul, King Saul, many years before the story, was told to kill Agag. He doesn't do it immediately. And before he kills this king, he decides to leave him, let him be. And in that 1 or 2 nights that Agag was alive, he was able to be together with his wife and have another child. So Agag is eventually killed, but his lineage is still there. And that's what the prophet had told Saul to wipe out. So now we've got ourselves a problem. We have this nation called Amalek that still exists. It's because of this mistake that Shaul HaMelech, King Saul, lost the kingship, and it went to a different person by the name of David, as in King David, who came from a different tribe. You're going to have to roll forward now, because sometimes events don't take weeks, months, or years. Sometimes they take generations to correct themselves, because King Saul's descendant was Mordechai, and Agag, the king of Amalek's descendant, was Haman, because Haman in the Megillah is called Ha-Agagi, the Agagite. So now these two individuals, Mordechai and Haman, are continuing a battle that had started generations before between two kings, King Agag and King Saul. That battle now is about to reignite after centuries. And so Haman walks around and he commands everyone to bow down to him. Mordechai, who is well known and a leader of the Jewish people, says, I'm not bowing down. Why didn't he just bow down? Well, one reason is because Haman used to wear an idol around his neck. Or some say he made himself into a god. You know how these dictators work. Before too long, they make themselves into gods. And so he decides not to bow down. But everyone else does. And they weren't in trouble for bowing down. Why doesn't he do it? Because he's trying to provoke a reaction. And a reaction he gets. Haman is so angry that Mordechai would not bow down to him when he was walking around Shushan Habira, the capital of Shushan, which was the capital of Persia in those days, that he says, not only am I going to kill Mordechai, I'm also going to kill all the rabbis and Jewish leaders who are like him, and I'm going to kill every single Jew in the entire world. My friends, the Purim story is one of the few, if not only, occasions where every single Jew in the entire world was at danger of being annihilated because Achashverosh has a second in command, Haman, and they own almost every area of land where Jews were living in those days. So now we have ourselves a problem. The problem is that Esther is queen. Nobody knows she's queen. Even Achashverosh doesn't know that she's Jewish. Mordechai is around the palace waiting to hear news of how Esther is doing. Haman is so furious that he takes it upon himself to wipe out every single Jewish person. By the way, how does Haman decide the date to kill all the Jewish people? And the answer is actually pretty interesting. He uses a lottery system. A lottery. How do you say a lottery system in Hebrew? Pur. The name Purim comes from the lottery that Haman chose. What a strange name to call the holiday. The entire holiday, which is going to end up with the saving of the Jewish people in Persia, is named after the lottery that Haman did. He actually used 3 dice to roll and decide which day to kill the Jewish people. He used a lottery system to do that. Isn't that strange? Why is that? Well, Haman came from, as we said, Amalek, and Amalek are atheists. And atheists sees the world as all chance. There's no leader, nothing is planned, it's all random. And so the lottery was his way of saying it's all random, it's all by chance. But we, the Jewish people, the people of Mordechai, the hero of the story, and Esther, the heroine of the story, are everything is going to be okay. No matter how bad the situation becomes, and it's about to become much, much worse than it appears right now, God is there and there is no chance. But I can't see God. As we said, Megillat Esther is the only book in all the scriptures where God's name is not mentioned. And so Haman rolls the dice, and he rolls it again and again. And he comes up with the month of Adar. Adar is the last Jewish month. Now, the month he did this lottery in this Pur was in Nisan, which is almost a year before. So he's made a decision that in 1 year's time, he's going to have all the Jewish people annihilated, wherever they are. And whoever wants to take up arms against Jews, they can, and they can steal their stuff. It's basically Nazi Germany, 1939 till 45. Free, whatever you want to do, go kill them and take their stuff. That's what Mordechai and Esther became aware of would be happening in just 1 year. Why was he happy with the month of Adar? Because even Haman knew that Adar has a very bad date in it, which is the 7th of Adar. And that's the date that Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moses died in. The mistake that Haman made was that Moses did die on the 7th of the month of Adar, the Jewish month of Adar, but he was also born on that day as well, 120 years before he died. So the 7th of Adar has a bad connotation, but it's also got an amazing connotation because he was born on that day. And so within Adar, that month, the month that we celebrate the holiday of Purim in, there are seeds of possible destruction, but we have the power, my friends, through good deeds and prayer and doing and saying the right things to turn the worst days into the best days. And that's exactly what Purim is. Because as we're going to see next week, this date that was chosen by Haman through his dice lottery, his randomness, which is what Amalek is all about. There's no plan to creation. There's no God. It's all lottery. He is going to come along, and we have the power to turn around that date that he chose to kill the Jewish people, and it becomes one of the greatest, most joyous days in the Jewish calendar and actually in Jewish history. It's going to be so great, the salvation, redemption of the Jewish people of Purim, that it's on par, if not even greater, say the rabbis, than the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. Not only that, you know the holiest day in the calendar, Yom Kippur? Yom means day. K as a prefix means like, Pur is Purim. Yom Kippur is great, but it's a day like Purim, but not as great. Purim, we're told, is even greater than Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur brings us closer to our spiritual mission, but through fasting and repentance. But Purim is even, that brings us closer to our spiritual mission in this world through drinking and singing and celebration. So that's where we are right now. Right now, Haman's got the money, he's got the power, he's got his enemies, he's got the date to kill the Jewish people. But we have a secret recipe. We have Esther in the palace. We have we have Mordechai outside. I'm already confusing Mordechai and Haman. I'm not even drunk yet. We have Mordechai outside the palace, keeping a careful eye. And we have the Jewish people who are going to turn their entire lives upside down in order to pray for the success of Mordechai and Esther and their incredible plan, which we're going to see next week, because their plan of overturning Haman is absolutely a suicide mission. And when I describe it to you, you're going to realize exactly how intense this mission was. So we're going to see next week, God willing, what that mission was, how Esther does it, how Mordechai does it, and how Haman is going to go from the highest heights and very quickly to the lowest lows. As we say in Hebrew, Yeshuat Hashem keheref ayin. God's redemption can occur in the blink of an eye. Thank you, everyone. Part 1 is done. God willing, I'll see you all next week for part 2 of more political intrigue and planning in the royal palace. Thanks.